Hello, Maddie, aka Hello Interloper here. Today we will be going over the pre-notice for monster balancing and improvements in a future patch that is coming to Summoner's War. I'm going to be discussing the different skills that will be altered and how it will affect the utility of certain monsters, and also tell you which monsters suddenly will become a little better and maybe you should reconsider using. So, it should be noticed that the actual balancing patch may differ from the details below. That's what it says there. It basically means that these are not final changes. These changes are what are currently being proposed, but in the actual patch we might not see some of them happen. We might see some of them be a little less, a little more. It's not an exact science, but this gives us a really good example of what will be improved. Now, first off, you probably need to turn up the quality of this video if you really want to actually see the exact improvements. I will be reading them out, but if you want to actually see it, you probably have to increase the quality. And of course that's by clicking on that little cog, and then you can upgrade it to HD 760p, I believe. Unfortunately, I can't make my quality of my HD video any better because I have a very old monitor and the aspect ratio unfortunately does not support 180p, which is kind of the standard at this point. So first off, we're going to talk about Magic Knight. It is the first monster on the list here. Everybody knows Magic Knight is kind of the newbie monster. You're given her fairly early in the game through achievements. I believe it's from doing the second scenario area. So, you know, she's just generally, usually everybody's first farmer. She does have some utility if you put Despair on her to stun a bunch of people just because of her wide range of multi-hit utility. But the unfortunate drawback to all that is she's extremely weak. The damage she does is fairly poor. Well, we're going to see a lot of this being changed, which is kind of interesting. All Magic Knights are having their basic attack have its damage increased by 33%. And that's kind of a big deal. That's a third of its total damage added onto that. So hopefully what we'll be seeing is a little bit stronger Magic Knights. Because frankly, she just can't compare to other monsters when it comes to dealing damage. You can have her 6 stars and she just doesn't do a lot of damage at all. So, Magic Knight Fire, Wind, and Light. I've never used any of those 3, but they have an ability called Magic Surge, which will have its damage increased by 11%. I don't really know how much more useful that will make that ability in particular, but hopefully it will give a little more damage to their skill set. Now, Magic Knight Water in particular has a ability called Retrieve Magic. And if you can't really remember that off the top of your head, it's her third ability that sucks the life out of all enemies and recovers her HP. The HP absorption effect is actually being increased from 30 to 50%, and the cooldown is being reduced by 1 turn. What this means is that she will be a much better farmer, and a lot of people use her as their first farmer for Famon Volcano. And unfortunately, she just can't really do the job as well as a lot of other monsters. If you've watched my previous video about Aquas, the the water charger shark, you know that he is a pretty darn efficient farmer for Famon, and he's pretty easy to get. So, frankly, he can really nicely replace Water Magic Knight Lapis as a farmer. Just do the job way better. Hopefully, the fact that she's having her basic attack and Retrieve Magic, her HP recovering attack, buffed, this means that she'll be a much better farmer and a better candidate for a first 6 star. Because usually you want your first 6 star to be a farmer. So, next in line is Desert Queen. Water, Wind, and Light are all having their cooldowns for specific abilities reduced by 1. Water has Private Invitation reduced from 6 to 5 turns. Wind has Delayed Promise reduced, oh my gosh, from 8 to 7 turns. Light has Gaze of Oblivion reduced from 8 to 7 turns. So, unfortunately, I don't know any of those abilities just because Desert Queen is one of the newest Nat 5s to be added to the game. I haven't seen a lot of her. But it seems that she's going to have a lot more utility now because she can use those abilities more often. Anubis, or Anubis, however you say it. Frankly, Anubis, he's kind of underwhelming. You know, he does have a lot of interesting abilities. You know, fire has a shield that's put on the monster with the lowest HP. It lasts a turn. You know, but just, and then, you know, water prevents enemies from reviving. And I'm not really sure about wind, but all I know is that usually when people pull an Anubis, they just aren't very happy about it, frankly, because he's just not as strong as other monsters. We're finally seeing a buff. So his basic attack, Pierce Soul, has had its damage increased by 11%. You know, it's not too much, but it does kind of, well, I guess the hope is to make it on par with other Nat 4s. Anubis, Water, Wind, and Light have Brand of Hell, which is having its damage increased by 11%. And then Anubis, Fire and Dark, Soul Devourer. And I'm pretty sure Soul Devourer heals based on the amount of damage it does. But its cooldown is being reduced from 4 turns to 3 turns, and its damage increased by 20%. Now, this is rather interesting. The Fire Anubis, which was generally seen as being very interesting in concept but not very effective, has a passive called Savior, and basically it puts a shield on the monster with the lowest HP for 1 turn. Now, it was, you know, nice in concept, as I said, but just generally not very effective. There are a lot of other shields that do the job better, and the fact that you can't control who the shield goes on is, you know, alright, but not as great as, let's say, a Cassis, I guess that's how you say it, Wind Sylphid, who, you know, puts the shield on everyone, does a critical hit chance reduction on everybody, and, you know, generally just seems a lot better defensively. Well, the shield duration is now being increased from 1 turn to 2 turns. And the shield damage absorption is increased by 33%. That is a pretty big deal. So it seems that Fire Anubis will finally be a viable choice, especially for Necropolis, because his main attack, his basic attack, is a double hitter. So this Savior passive might actually be really useful in keeping one of your weaker team members safe. Now, Dark has Deadly Wrath, whose damage is being increased by 25%. That's a fairly significant buff. And I guess a lot of Dark Anubis owners have that to look forward to. So now Horus Fire has Strategic Prevention. The cooldown is reduced by 1 turn from 5 to 4 turns. I unfortunately don't know that much about Horus, so I can't really tell you how useful that'll be, but any cooldown reduction is a welcome change. Now, the mummies are actually all being buffed. Their main attack, Touch of Corruption, has its damage increased by 21%, which is a rather big damage increase, seeing that it's a 3-star monster, not a Nat 4 or anything, but this might actually make a huge difference. Now, Mummies, Water, Fire, and Dark have Smother, which is an AoE attack, and the damage is increased by 15%. Mummy Light has Soul Division, and it has its cooldown reduced from 8 turns to 7 turns. So overall, I personally am wondering if this will make Water Mummy a better choice for, you know, a stun monster, because Water Mummy does have an innate 25% chance of freezing an enemy. So if you put Despair on top of that, you have a fairly good chance of stunning or freezing the enemy. But now that the damage is upped a little more, I wonder if he'll be a little more viable in that regard. So you might want to keep an eye on that. Now, Cowgirl. All Cowgirls are having their basic attack altered. The chance to cause harmful effects is increased from 20% to 30%. Seeing that she's a fairly popular Necropolis monster, this is probably a good thing. Howl. Now this is kind of a strange one. Wind Howl's attack heal ability has its damage increased by 10%. Wind Howl was never really a viable option for a healer to begin with. I believe the Awakened version is named Choo Choo or something like that. They all have very strange Awakened names. But that's just a very odd change. I don't think that's really going to be adding a lot of utility to her. Now, Mystic Witch Fire, Spell of Removal, has its minimum recovery amount increased from 10% to 15%. This isn't too big of a change, but it's a pretty welcome change, I would say, because every little bit of healing does count, and the fact that she was a secret dungeon monster pretty recently, this might help a few newbies out in building a better healing monster. Now we're seeing some changes to Salamander, which is pretty strange. Salamander, Water, Fire, and Light have Stomp. The damage now scales based on attack power and defense instead of attack power only. Same goes with Wind Salamander's Sandstorm, Dark Salamander's Dark Storm, Water Salamander's Glacial Crash, and Fire Salamander's Earthquake. So it's rather interesting because from what I think, Salamander is kind of, a little bit defensive. So now that the attack damage scales on power of attack power and defense instead of attack power only, there might possibly be some use for Salamander. We're going to have to see once that's actually implemented, but that's a rather curious change. It's interesting, though, because we don't know how much the attack power and defense will actually scale up the damage. So I guess we're just going to have to see whether it makes a very significant change or not. Yeti is actually seeing a change, which I'm actually very happy for, because Wind Yeti used to be a staple of a Giants team just because of his very quick and effective HP recovery ability. So Water, Wind, and Light Yeti all have Heavy Slash. This damage now scales with attack power and defense instead of attack power only, which makes a lot of sense because if you are building a Wind Yeti for defensive and healing capabilities, obviously you're going to slap on a lot of defense and not a lot of attack power. So now finally the damage being based off of attack power and defense will finally do a little more damage. Now Yeti Fire, also known as Tantra, has Fire Burst. Its damage is increased by 8%, which is kind of strange because Tantra's not really used that much anyway. So I'm not really sure what this damage increase is really helping. Dark Yeti, who is a fusion monster, has Shadow Burst increased by 8%, which is also very odd. Not really sure it's going to make much of a difference in how useful this monster is. So now we see a lot of changes with Harpoon, which is interesting because one of the best monsters that recently has come to light as a raid monster is Colleen, who is Fire Harpoon. She is an attack buff and has a very quick heal all ability, and a lot of people are using her in raid to just heal their entire team very quickly. So Blackout Kick is having its damage increased by 12%, Blackout Kick being the basic attack for all Harpoon. Then Water, Fire, and Dark have Deadly Dart, which is a ability that applies HP recovery blocks, and that damage is being increased slightly, 6%, not a huge increase, but still an increase nonetheless. Wind is having Whirlpool damage increased by 5%, which is very minor. I'm not very sure what the thinking was behind that. And then Dark Harpoon, Violent Friends, chance to decrease defense is increased from 20% to 30%. From what I've seen, Dark Harpoon has been being used for Necropolis because Violent Friends is a multi-hit, and so I'm thinking that if Dark Harpoon is actually able to break through the shield and is able to apply a defense break, that might be kind of good. So I would probably keep an eye on that. If you're looking for another Necropolis monster that you want to be able to farm easily, wait for Dark Day and maybe get yourself a Fire Harpoon, because a lot of people use them as is, and this is only going to make it more useful. Now, Phoenix Water, also known as Sigmaris, is having Ice Volcanoes damage increased by 9%. I think that's absolutely wonderful because I recently fused Sigmaris and I'm really liking him on Rage Blade, so that's going to be a huge boon. 9% really can make or break the difference between killing your enemy, especially when it comes to arena or guild wars. So now Assassin. Assassin has been a very interesting monster, mainly because a lot of people don't use it because it's just very squishy but very powerful, also known as a quote glass cannon. But it seems that we're having a lot of changes being put onto Assassin. All of the assassins have exposed weakness as their basic attack. The chance to decrease the defense has been increased from 25% to 50%, which is really high. I guess they're trying to make Assassin be a good replacement for, I'm not saying replacing as in, okay, we don't need Belladon anymore to heal. I'm saying if you want to go full damage, Belladon is usually the go-to for defense break there. Now you can put in Assassin and have a full damage team if you want to do a, quote, YOLO team. So that's kind of interesting. Assassin Water, Fire, and Light all have an ability called Death Verdict. The damage has been increased by 15%. And Assassin Water has Blade Dance of the Reaper. The attack speed requirement to increase the number of attacks has been lowered. So that means it doesn't matter if you don't have a really high speed, you'll probably get more attacks. So overall, it just seems very interesting that they are altering the Assassin. Because, I've faced a lot of Dark Assassins and Wind Assassins that absolutely kicked my butt. So, this makes Assassin a little more scary. Sky Dancer Light, Charge Vitality. That's Sky Dancer Light's healing ability. The recovery amount is increased from 25% to 50%. Now, this is really good for owners of Sky Dancer Light, but a little scary for people who do Trial of Ascension, because I know there is a stage in Trial of Ascension where you're going through there and there are Sky Dancer Lights and there are Occult Girl Winds. And Occult Girl Wind, from what I remember, has a lot of attack bar reductions. And then, of course, you have Sky Dancer Light, who is throwing heals everywhere. If you don't have a sufficient team, that might become a big pain in the butt. Now, Dark Dragon Knight has a passive called Eye for an Eye, and this actually, oh man, the attack bar increase effect has increased from 10% to 20%, and it's also really, really deadly because there is a Trial Ascension level where Dark Dragon Knight is paired up with a bunch of Dark Infernos, and you can have your team absolutely decimated because of Eye for an Eye. Now this is going to make this even tougher. So, those are some scary changes we're going to see there with those last two if you're a Trial of Ascension addict. Now, the skills of some monsters have changed, which is kind of interesting. And these are some major changes here. Vagabond Wind has Slash Wind. Instead of increasing the critical rate by 30%, the skill will now provoke for one turn with a 100% chance. that's kind of interesting because Vagabond Wind is usually a newbie enemy, you know, monster. You get him as a starter monster. So this will probably give him a little more utility in the early game. Anubis Water has Soul Destroyer passive. That's the when I was talking about how if you kill somebody with Water Anubis Water, they can't revive. So the additional effect is killing an enemy will grant you soul protection for 2 turns. Soul protection means that if you're killed, you will automatically be revived. So that's rather interesting. Cowgirl, Water, Fire, and Dark defeat Wild Dog. The additional effect is now that critical hits will increase the attack bar by 10%. That is pretty darn good if it's an additional effect on top of what it already does. That will make them a lot more useful in Necropolis. So now Cowgirl Wind, Whirlwind Shot. Instead of increasing the critical rate by 50%, the skill now will decrease the target's attack bar by 15% with critical hits. So that means, unfortunately, you're going to have to put on more crit rate on her if you want her to be useful in that regard. But that attack bar reduction is going to be pretty interesting. Nine-Tailed Fox Dark has an ability called Nightmare. The stun effect applied with critical hits will now be a guaranteed stun. So you don't have to get a critical hit to stun, if I'm reading this correct. Sea Emperor Fire, Rain of Stones. An additional effect is that your attack bar will be increased by 25% for each stunned enemy target. That's going to be kind of scary because Rain of Stones is generally a mass stun ability, kind of how Wind Phantom Thief, oh my goodness, has a mass stun ability. So Dragon Knight Water, also known as Chow, has Torrent and is being changed to Justice. Before, Torrent was the damage of this attack increases as your HP drops. If your HP is below 30%, the enemy's defense is ignored. Now it's been changed to Justice. Channels Burning Rage to inflict great damage to an enemy. The damage increases according to the number of dead allies. That's kind of interesting, but it seems almost to me that Chow is now being funneled into a role where he will be soloing and you know, like giants or dragons or something like that, because let's say, you know, Chow has a passive ability called Flow, and that's also being altered, which is kind of interesting. It says that the additional effect will be that the damage increases the damage according to the current HP, so he'll do more damage based off of his HP. I'm not sure if the lesser his HP is, the more damage he'll do, or the more HP, the more damage he'll do. I don't know. That's not specified. But the fact that Justice does more damage according to number of dead allies, that's a little curious, because right now Chow is kind of used mainly as a solo monster or a farming monster. So this kind of funnels him even more into that role. You know, if your allies are dead, you do more damage. You can solo giants or dragons quicker. So that's rather interesting, because I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, I hate Chow. You know, I used to love Chow, but now Chow is useless now that I can do dragons B10 and dragons, you know, giants B10. So, rather curious. Now, the Undines. Water, Aqua Frenzy. Additional effect is 50% chance to increase the target's chance to land a glancing hit for 2 turns. That's really interesting because, you know, right now, glancing hits, let me think of some enemies that, or monsters that do glancing hits. There's the basic attack of Pixies, basic attack of Sky Dancer. Sorry about this. It died. I'm going to have to do part 2 in a moment.